Fortunate today to have Jonah Seiger join us. Jonah was the chief online strategist for the Bloomberg '09 campaign. He's an old friend of Personal Democracy Forum, a lover of New York, and somebody who my partner Mika Sifry from the Personal Democracy Forum and I have admired since we met him, who's really one of the foremost thinkers about how online media is changing the political landscape. So without further ado, Jonah, please take it away and get ready for some tough questions when you're done.
Thanks, Andrew. Thank you all very much for coming. Thank you to Personal Democracy Forum at ClickZ and Top for hosting us here tonight. It's really great to be a part of Social Media Week. This event is really remarkable that there's a conference going on simultaneously in 5 cities around the world. It's pretty cool to be a part of it. I appreciate you all coming out. As Andrew mentioned, I'm the founder and managing partner of an interactive agency called Connections Media. We're a full-service agency focusing on political and public affairs campaigns. The company's been around since 2004. I've personally been involved in online campaigns since the early 90s. Some of you who follow internet issues might remember the Black Page protest in 1996. That was my work, and that was around the time that I hooked up with Mika and Andrew and Kate, and have been providing digital strategy services for candidates and corporate and foundation nonprofit clients continuously since 1997. We've had the great privilege to work with Mayor Bloomberg both in 2005 and in 2009. My team was responsible for the entire digital media program for the campaign in '09. And what I wanted to do, just to set some of the context for this discussion, is run through very quickly some of the elements of the program. Digital media encompasses a lot. It's not just a website. It's not just social media. It's not just online advertising. It's part communications, part field, part volunteer. One of the things that's unique about the Bloomberg campaign is that we had one contributor. So unlike the traditional political campaign, we were not soliciting contributions. In many ways, that made our job a lot harder. I think it's easier to get people engaged in the campaign when they're making a personal investment out of their pocket. But as you'll see, that didn't stop us from having success. Before I get into this, though, just a quick poll. How many of you are New York City residents? Okay, almost all of you. And how many of you noticed what we were doing online in 2009? Okay, pretty much represents what I'm talking about. Also, if you want to follow me, I'm kind of an infrequent tweeter, maybe a little bit more than Rasiej, although I'm not followed by the New York Times, and it's not that. But if you're so inclined. This was the campaign website. This is a kind of an amalgam of things as it looked sort of on election day. Very rich experience, lots of content, very deep, search engine optimized very effectively. And one of the things that we were very proud of was this bottom bar technique, which we've started to see other candidates copy. Gave us an opportunity to present an engagement option right there on every page at the bottom. And you'll notice that Facebook Connect button. We made pretty substantial use of Facebook Connect, and we can talk about that a little bit more. During the course of the campaign, we placed more than 1 billion targeted online ad impressions. Kate did a little story today going through the campaign finance board filings about the spending. Just to let you do the math, it was a little bit less than 0.02 of a cent per impression. Pretty remarkable ability to leverage online. And these were all very highly targeted display, CPC, CPM, and text ads. Still, about a little bit more than 40% of the traffic to the site during the course of the campaign came from social media and what we would call search engine optimization. So organic traffic from sites that are represented there and more. Our YouTube channel, we had an amazing web video team run by Brian Zitron and generated hundreds of really great videos. Some of them are still up on the campaign's web channel. Generated about 224,000 plays with an average of about 30 seconds each. It's the equivalent of almost 450,000 30-second TV spots that were viewed for free. Now, of course, there was some cost in producing that content, but not a dime was spent in generating that equivalent of 448,000 30-second commercial plays. Roughly 1.1 million people voted in the 2009 election. We had a little bit more than 500,000 unique visitors from New York City. That comes out to a ratio of about 46%. Now, that does not mean that 46% of the people who voted visited our website. But when you put that in context of how many people voted and our unique visitors from New York City is pretty remarkable, especially when you consider that in 2005, that equivalent number was only 11%. I would attribute that largely to two things. The increased interest in politics among people online between 2005 and 2009. Of course, we had the 2008 election, which engaged a lot of people online. And the impact of social media and the ability to engage people much more richly. Also, I would add that this does not account for the hundreds and hundreds of thousands of visits that were directed towards third-party content. We put a lot of things out on Twitter and Facebook, links to news stories and other things that we did not track in this way. So this is only traffic to MikeBloomberg.com. In the end of the campaign, we had just over 40,000 combined Facebook supporters and Twitter followers. Now that may seem relatively small when you think about Starbucks, which is in the 5 million range, but when you compare it to our opponent, his total was 6,000, just a little bit more than 6,000. And I think that's a pretty significant sign of the success and the interest in our campaign within social media. This is a graph of Twitter followers to @MikeBloomberg, starting at 0 when we launched the campaign at the beginning of February. Our Facebook growth mirrors this, with the exception that it started at about 6,000. The mayor's Facebook page has existed in a different capacity before the campaign got underway. And I think we're going to come back to this, but this growth, this bump, which is about a 50% jump, was the direct result of the mayor personally tweeting for a day in August. We made no pretenses that Mike Bloomberg was personally sitting at a keyboard or on a mobile device tweeting at any given time. We never spoke in a first-person voice. But he's very interested in technology. One of the great honors and privileges about working for Mayor Bloomberg is that he's personally very interested and engaged with technology, and he wanted to try it. And the announcement of that and the day that he did it and the corresponding press coverage and interest generated a huge increase in our followers and continued a trajectory at a much higher level than we were at before. We essentially doubled our followers from August 1st to the middle of September. I want to briefly show you some of the examples of our online ads. I can go into more detail if people want to see this. You probably saw some of these during the course of the campaign. There were, by my count, almost 400 discrete creative that we ran during the course of the campaign. These are 6 of them, some of my favorites. Some of you may remember that Bono gave a shout out to the mayor at U2's show at Giants Stadium at the end of September, and so of course we made an ad that linked to a video of it. This was an ad that, very beautiful rich media ad that ran, these are just static frames, that ran right after the primary in September. That one at the bottom was part of our final Get Out the Vote effort creative. We also did a great deal of search ads. Kate has written a little bit about this one. This one got tweeted about a lot. We've never seen anybody do this before. We were pretty excited about this idea that if you searched Twitter from a New York City zip code, you saw that ad on search engines, and it did drive a substantial number of our followers. As you can see, the ads all reference different specific content on the site. Lots of targeting went into the placement of these. I use this example as some of the creative that we ran to promote specific events. This is the mayor's participation in the June Pride March. You're able to, as you probably all know, target very specifically by geolocation with online advertising. This map is the New York Times election returns. The mayor is in red, our opponent in blue, overlaid against our online targeting for the final 5-6 days in October 27th through November 3rd. And as you can see, we were able to focus much of our message to those places where we really felt it was important to reach people, and by the results, we did pretty well with that. This is just an interesting little analysis of a snapshot. This was in October of click performance by keyword on Google. And you can see what was really driving. Bloomberg was obviously, education was a big issue in the campaign. Around the time of that U2 ad, Bono was getting a lot of clicks. Al Gore is on there. I'm going to just briefly show you some screenshots from our Facebook Connect integration. This was the Bloomberg community homepage. There were a couple different ways into the Facebook community. We had geographic groups by borough, so this is Brooklyn for Mike, and a number of groups related to affinities. Women for Bloomberg is another example. A lot of video content. Using the Facebook Connect, we were able to display member profile information. We could show you your friends who were involved. And this was really focused around building local community and affinity communities and getting people to engage with events. And you could sign up to events with your Facebook account and invite your Facebook friends to participate. Well, the mayor is a big believer in technology and very personally interested in technology. He also, of course, asked me many times, is this going to get me any votes? Which is a totally legitimate question. And we've always felt that we were engaging people who were likely voters, and with the precision of our targeting and the ability of the entire digital strategy to engage voters, that we were certainly contributing to the larger GOTV effort. But post-election, we've gone back and tried to analyze this question with a little bit more precision. What I'm going to show you is sort of how we got there and the narrative of that. One of the interesting things about Twitter, as you all probably know, is that you can see into Twitter the number of followers and followers of your followers. And when we do an analysis of the roughly 15,000 followers of Mike Bloomberg on Twitter, we see roughly 31 million followers of Mike Bloomberg's followers. When we look a little deeper, we see that roughly 3.5 of them are in New York City. Now, the fact that 11% are in New York City was interesting to me. 26% of those followers were in New York, which is also interesting to me, given that I just assumed that most people didn't have a profile location in their Twitter account, or had Tehran, or outer space, or whatever. Twitter is moving more towards geolocation, and I think this will be very important for the kind of execution of social media and politics, where location is very, very important. Just some of the hashtags that were used by us and by others in talking about the mayor and issues relating to the campaign, during the campaign. You see Yankees, very large. I think our Twitter strategy was substantially benefited by the fact that the Yankees were in the World Series, because it gave us the ability to target people who were likely in New York, or at least Yankees fans, because we could get into that stream. There's also a lot of chatter on the borough level, Brooklyn being one of the most. And Twitter was another really good thing for us because of the mayor's personally tweeting for the day, and a lot of people talked about that Google ad that I showed you before. So in the final 10 days, as part of a very comprehensive Get Out the Vote program, we wanted to try to leverage as much as we could the social graph of our supporters. We came up with this idea of tweet out the vote, and combined it with a more tried and true concept of donating your Facebook status. We can talk a little bit later about the Facebook status donation. There's some issues with the Facebook platform rules that actually, they don't really want me showing this anymore, because they don't want people to be doing this. But it did prove to be very effective for us. And the tweet out the vote component was much bigger than I ever would have anticipated it being. This was a landing page that was the destination of tweets that our supporters were tweeting, Facebook statuses, things we were putting out, and we did run a little bit of paid advertising to support this as well. So what would happen is people come to the site, click that button, and it scripts It's X dates to election day. I support Mike Bloomberg for re-election. Help me tweet out the vote on November 3rd. This bit.ly link goes back to that page that I talked about. And we used varying hashtags to be relevant. Now, we didn't spam this into Yankees hashtags. We talked about let's go Yankees, but using hashtags to drive relevant traffic to the site. We also made a point, this is something actually that I learned from Andrew when I first started talking about social media, that social media is as much about listening as it is about talking. And talking back to the people that talk about you is a very important part, particularly in Twitter. So, Mike Bloomberg would acknowledge people, particularly people with large numbers of followers, that were participating in this tweet out the vote effort. Here's another one. Here's another one. Here's Mike Bloomberg acknowledging people. It helped us that some of our followers happen to be highly influential people. Jack Dorsey is someone that's known to many of you. Craig Newmark. A number of people with very large numbers of followers who are very influential in this space were participating with us in this effort. And here's Mike. Mike also tweeted for the day on election day. Some of you in the press who were here kind of snickered at that a little bit. But he saw all this. I personally showed it to him, and this is what he said. Thank you, everybody, for tweeting out the vote. But of course, go out and actually vote. There's much more to election day than just tweeting about. Similarly, this is what my Facebook status, my Facebook homepage looked like at the moment when the status donation came into effect. These are all people saying, today's election day in New York City, I'm voting for better schools, I'm voting to keep our city moving forward, I'm voting for Mike Bloomberg, with a link back to that page. Now, obviously not everybody in New York looked like this, some of these people worked on a campaign, but you get the idea of the personal endorsement that represents. So, did it matter? I think the important thing to put this into context is to say everything that we did as a campaign, every single person who worked on the campaign, every tactic that we deployed mattered in the outcome. I don't think social media made more of a difference than anything else, but I think it was a part of our overall success. Remember that we had 40,000 combined Twitter and Facebook followers and supporters compared to our opponents. Quantifying the social media sphere in New York City is very difficult. That number that I showed you for 3.5 million is probably not 3.5 million people. It's 3.5 million accounts. That was just for Twitter. When I go into Facebook to buy advertising, targeted advertising, they show me around 3.5 million, 3.5, 3.7 million people. Twitter's looking more like 3.4, 3.5. So the Facebook, Twitter world is roughly 7, almost 8 million accounts. We think from everything that we've been able to see that the sphere of people that were active in online, on Facebook and Twitter in the final couple of days before the elections, roughly 3 million people. I actually think that's pretty conservative. I think I could make an argument that it's closer to 4, but for the sake of putting this into context, I would say it's about 3. And we know that the volume of stuff that was going on, people talking about Mike Bloomberg, represented about a 10% share of voice. Now again, I think I could stand here and give you a larger number, but from what we've been able to see, 1 in 10 people who were on social media, particularly Facebook and Twitter, in the days leading up to Election Day, saw somebody they knew say, I'm voting for Mike Bloomberg, you should too. That personal peer-to-peer communication, more than any other form of paid, a paid commercial or a mailer, has that legitimacy and that personal touch that we believe is very substantial and very motivating. So if you take that 10% of 3 million to 300,000, and you run the straight citywide averages on turnout, 24%, 51% for Bloomberg, you get about 36,720 voters out of that 300,000. I think that's pretty safe, pretty conservative way of cutting it. But we've done some research. I'm the chair of the board of the Institute for Politics, Democracy, and the Internet at George Washington University. The Pew Center has looked at these questions. We don't have any information about social media. in voter participation, but we do know that people who are bloggers and people who regularly read blogs, Pew defines it as, what do they say, online political citizens. People who are engaged in politics and also in digital media tend to participate at a much higher degree than the average. So I don't know what that is in New York City. Is it twice the turnout? Probably not. 48% seems a little high. But if we just say 40% as a kind of back of the envelope, and also assume that people who follow people who are engaged in the campaign or are friends with people who are engaged in the campaign look like those people, demographically, education, income, employment, that they tend to be clustered around similar demographics. We know from our looking at results that people who fit certain demographic profiles and live in certain places were more likely to vote for the mayor. There's some precincts where the margin was in the 80% range. But just taking a conservative view of this, saying 40% of those people voted and 70% of those people voted for the mayor, it brings you to about 85,000 votes. And neither of these really mean much until you consider that the final margin of victory was just over 50,000 votes. Starts to put that in a much different context. So that's all I have. I'm hoping that you have tons of questions. Fire away, Andrew.
All right, well, first let me introduce Kate. Why don't you take a seat? Kate Kaye from ClickZ, who used to write for us at Personal Democracy Forum. We're saddened when she left, but is one of the premier writers in the country on technology, marketing, politics, and society. And it was actually Kate's idea to bring Jonah to New York for this particular session, and we were very happy to be invited to join in. So I'm going to let Kate take the lead on the questions here. But one other thing I want to quickly mention, because I'll forget, is I want to thank the people from the Open Planning Project whose space you're in. And if you don't know the Open Planning Project, I suggest you look on it online. These are the folks who are really digging in deep in how open data and open source technologies are redefining and redesigning cities. And they're graciously offered us this wonderful space, and so we're very grateful to them for helping us. So Kate, fire away.
Thanks, Andrew. And thanks so much to PDF for helping us get the space. It's was a key component of getting this event together. And thanks to Jonah for the, I think, really interesting presentation. And I imagine you guys all had some questions. I know I did. But first off, I just want to tell you a little bit about ClickZ and sort of like why I'm here. I developed our politics and advocacy section. It's within our news section. If you go to clickz.com and go to our news section, you'll see the politics and advocacy coverage, which is updated on a regular basis. It's really, really unique content. If you're interested in paid digital media usage by political and advocacy campaigns, it's an awesome place to look. And today, there's a story up that Jonah referred to detailing the spending of the Bloomberg campaign. According to my tally, and the New York Board of Elections information, his campaign spent about $2.1 million online. And it's interesting. If any of you guys have your laptops out, I suggest you go take a look at that story, because I did a little pie chart, and even though what we're talking about is really fascinating, the reality is it accounted for about 3% of the spending of the campaign. So not to say that that means it was 3% of the impact, and that has a lot to do with what we're going to be discussing, but it's still so minute that it's just important to keep that in perspective, I think. But Jonah, one of the things that when you started your presentation, you mentioned something that I've been wondering, and you didn't really answer it, I don't think, yet. Okay, well, you suggested that, or at least you acknowledged the fact that the Bloomberg campaign, that one of the key differentiators of the campaign is that he didn't really have to worry about fundraising. This is an anomaly among political campaigns. I mean, there are very few that really don't have to worry about fundraising, and typically fundraising is kind of the thing that happens throughout. So, and really, most political campaigns think of online as an ATM still. So you were able to, I mean, the fact that you got buy-in to use digital in such an important way and to really be such an important component of the campaign is interesting by itself, because they weren't worried about fundraising. But I'm hoping that maybe you can elaborate a little bit on what you said about how it in a way was difficult for you to get the engagement that maybe a campaign that was fundraising online might have.
It's a great question. I just, before I jump into that, the one observation I'd make about the media spend that Kate mentioned is that it's important to remember that New York City is the most expensive media market in America, and that does have an impact on the way that those expenditures were allocated. I can say unequivocally that from the top of the campaign down to the volunteers, that digital was embraced in a way that I'd never seen before. Everybody understood, and I think that was partly a reflection of the age of the people that were running the campaign, partly a reflection of the mayor's personal interest in technology and engagement in technology, and of course the success of the Obama campaign. I mean, remember, we launched in February of 2009. It was just a few months after the 2008 election. An awareness of the importance of digital as a communications channel and as an engagement channel, not just as a fundraising channel. I think we would have done pretty much the same thing if we were looking to raise money, but of course that was not our charge. But a real, true, full embracing of online as a core component of the campaign, integrated across the campaign. I think that one of the challenges, and Kate, you said it, that a lot of campaigns tend to look at the internet as an ATM machine, is that ends up driving message in ways that go to the extremes. And I think that's actually one of the problems in our politics, is that when you look at how do I maximize, how do I optimize on the contribution, it drives message in a certain direction that may not appeal to the larger electorate. But at the same time, it does in fact make it harder for a campaign like ours to engage people. When you're asking somebody to make a personal investment in the campaign, it takes on a different meaning for that person. The mayor enjoys, at the time of the beginning of the campaign and still today, very, very strong approval ratings in the city. On election day, exit polls were showing more than 70% approval for the mayor. And so in that sense, it made it easier. I think if we were a challenger trying to engage people without asking them to contribute, it might have been a little bit challenging. Whereas a campaign that is seeking to raise money online will optimize all of its targeting and focus all its analytics on the contribution, we looked at it differently. We looked at it from the standpoint of a recruitment of a volunteer or a Facebook fan or a Facebook supporter or a Twitter follower. And did the same things that we would do if we were raising money, just looking at it from the standpoint of engagement rather than financial contribution.
Were there any examples of messaging that you think you were able to do maybe earlier on than you might have otherwise if you were just focusing on fundraising? Maybe provide some examples or contrast with other campaigns that you've seen, even Obama, for instance.
I'm not really sure how to answer that.
Does the question make sense? I mean, I guess I'm wondering in terms of like add creative or messaging. You said that you were able to have different messaging or sort of have a different approach to the ad messages or just the messages that you were disseminating. Were there things that you were able to focus on more? I mean, maybe more issue-based stuff that you wouldn't have done if you were just having direct call to action stuff for fundraising?
At the beginning of the campaign, our focus was not exclusively, but largely on volunteer recruitment. And so our initial flights were targeted based on where we felt we could get the most people to come and participate in the campaign. And we used the insight that we got from those returns to further target our messaging and our placements.
Okay. So I thought it would be interesting if you could kind of bring out a couple of key moments in the election cycle in the current events of the campaign and sort of correlate them to how you used the web, how you might have used advertising or targeting or, the social media presence, whatever. An example that we've discussed in the past is on the day that Bloomberg did his own tweeting, he also just happened to be one of the suggested Twitter accounts. And that really, really raised the amount of followers that he gained that day, right?
It's an interesting story. So the original tweet for the day happened to coincide with the day after the horrible mid-air collision over the Hudson, the tourist helicopter and a small plane. And after a couple of days of promoting this, we decided, I think, for very valid reasons, that it just wasn't the right time for the mayor to be twittering with a serious crisis facing him. And so we postponed it for, I think, 48 hours. Previous to that, we had scheduled a meeting with the mayor and Jack Dorsey. It just happened to correspond with the same day that it was rescheduled for. And I really do think that those two things combined to dramatically increase the visibility and the presence. Now, it didn't hurt that reporters, and some of you were in the room, enjoyed talking about the mayor tweeting for a day. That was a kind of a side benefit, but it also helped drive awareness and promotion. And that combined dialogue of people on Twitter talking about the mayor tweeting, the press coverage of it, the fact that it was scheduled and postponed. TechCrunch wrote a really funny headline, something like Mayor Bloomberg cancels his tweeting for the day to, actually do his job. I thought that snark was actually kind of funny. All of that drove awareness in a way that we didn't completely anticipate. And as I showed you on that graph, it propelled our followers. Again, that in those 10 days before and after, we grew by about 50%. So yeah, that's a great example of events driving the bottom line. And I think that our team, the entire campaign team, the communications team, was smart about how we leveraged that growth and continued to try to pursue it. But it was largely an opportunity that just happened to present.
Yeah. Do you remember what the numbers were?
The numbers.
Day before, day after Twitter followers?
Sure, but
For that day, though?
I think
Approximately, like how many you went up?
6,000 to 9,000.
Okay.
Roughly in between, I think it was like August 10th and August 18th, something like that.
Were there any other key moments during the race that you think there was something really significantly interesting or innovative that you did online?
Every day we focus on how do we integrate our digital tactics into the larger campaign strategy. And sometimes that was focused heavily on field, sometimes that was focused heavily on communications. I don't know that there was any one thing more than a series of very deliberate and focused decisions that we, from the top down, that we tried to think about how do we make the most of the tools that we have, the platform we have, the constituencies that we've been able to engage with. Always towards the goal of building. We never stopped trying to grow those numbers. Because the unique thing, I do a lot of corporate public affairs work, as I mentioned before. The unique thing, the fun thing about election campaigns is that it all comes down to one day. I mean, nothing really matters except for what happens on election day. And we were driving towards building the best possible organization that we could create. Our campaign knocked on more than 2 million doors here in New York City. It's really unbelievable the size of the field operation that Maura and Lenny and that team built. And digital was underlying that and supporting that. So everything was oriented towards how can we every day make the most of what we've got.
So digital, the integration stuff is, I think, especially interesting and obviously really important. It's not the stuff that most people see, but it's really key. I mean, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that. And one thing that's interesting that you just mentioned, the field operation having to be really correlated well with the digital operation. There's an example that you guys might be familiar with recently, the Scott Brown campaign. the guy who ran their digital stuff, Rob Willington, he made it like a really key thing to work with the field operation to make sure that they were aware that they were probably going to have an onslaught of volunteers going to local field offices to volunteer to get out to knock on doors and canvass as a result of an online ad campaign that he was running in the last few days of the campaign in Massachusetts. Did you guys do anything like that? Or maybe can you provide some examples of like the day-to-day discussions with other campaign divisions and give us a sense of it?
Than that example.
Okay. How is that not disciplined?
Well, I think that we understood the dimensions of the GeoTV program when we were beginning the campaign in February of 2009. A lot of us had been involved in high-profile, high-stakes campaigns at the national level, state level. A lot of people, including myself, had worked on the mayor's 2005 campaign. Some of them had worked in 2001. We understood what we were getting into, and so we were planning always for that final, really final day. Although you work backwards from that, so we never had a scenario where it was like, "Holy crap, we haven't thought about this. What are we going to do?" We certainly had things that where we would adjust our tactics, but the macro was not a mystery. I think the Scott Brown example is really important, and it has sparked a lot of discussion, certainly among those of us who practice online politics, about, is the Republican Party now ascendant as this example? I think the jury's still out on that. I think what Scott Brown was able to do very successfully, very effectively, was nationalize the race. I think if you look back at his...
It was a special election. It sort of, and it sort of was automatically going to... It was a referendum on healthcare reform. I mean, it couldn't have not been national.
The Boston media talks about it as saying that the referendum was, we've already got a program in Massachusetts, we don't need a federal one, not that we don't want healthcare reform. I think there's some real interesting lessons, some pickup from, I mean, frankly, what we did. Scott Brown's campaign essentially copied Tweet Out the Vote in the final week. They called it something else.
That's probably going to be used all the time now. I mean,
so if imitation is flattery, I'm flattered. But I think that the most salient lesson of what Scott Brown did that we didn't have to do, our opponent probably missed an opportunity to, was nationalize the race. And to bring in money and support from outside to propel him forward. There's also been talk about iPhone apps for GeoTV in the Scott Brown campaign. If anybody's seen that, I'd love to see it. As far as I can tell, it's vaporware, but if somebody can show it to me, I'd be...
Yeah, I don't know. And just to be clear, Thompson's campaign people, digital campaign people, were invited tonight. We wanted to have them here. Obviously, it would have made... It was Blue State Digital. And they declined to participate. So, so can we talk a little bit about targeting niche demographics and voter demographics?
No, it's fine. Go ahead, go. One more.
Oh yeah, well, I want you to ask one.
Well,
Sorry, Kate, I'm looking at...
Yeah, I told him to nudge me.
No, it's fine. It's all right.
And I want to make sure we get questions.
I actually just have a couple of quick questions, which we can just get through pretty quickly. So, in your presentation, you mentioned a little bit about certain sections of New York that were more demographically or likely to have social media users. Was there any actual formal attempt to compare that data with actual precincts and getting out the vote, or where were the most bloggers, and was there a correlation between Williamsburg, for example, where you're going to find a lot of 20 to 30-year-olds who are probably online, versus a section, Bay Ridge, Staten Island, right?
Not with the level of kind of profiling that I think your suggestion implies, but certainly there are a lot of smart people in the campaign who know New York City really, really well. As you can imagine, there was a lot of polling going on. And looking at having successfully run twice before in New York City, we knew a lot about the New York City electorate. But no, we weren't going block by block saying this precinct has the most bloggers. No. But when you look at where internet usage is the highest, where certain demographic characteristics favor people who are more likely to be online, yes, we did think about it that way. But most of our targeting was more oriented in a GOTV, get out the vote approach based on segments that we were trying to engage, overlaid with contextual type of targeting. So Kate noticed at one point that we were running Jorge Posada, the Yankees.
I'm a big Mets fan, by the way.
Yeah,
But I was still targeted with Posada.
that was not based on your Mets or Yankees affiliation. Program, and it had modest success. I think that for me anyway, this campaign has proven that in the absence of some really big compelling reason for somebody to give you their cell phone number, like we're going to announce our vice presidential candidate, you must sign up to get SMS alerts in order to know who it is, people don't really want to give you that information. But the mobile web was hugely important.
Right,
And I
okay.
think that's what social media is largely about, particularly Twitter. It is about engaging with people in a mobile device. So I think that is an emerging trend. I will say that there's some, and many of you probably know this if you're developers, that there's some weirdness between how link shorteners like Bitly and others that create a 301 redirect and analytics programs talk to each other. So we did have a little bit of a concern. We saw a lot more, all the data that I gave you here was based off our site analytics program. If I were combining the oranges from our Bitly traffic, the numbers would be much higher, but I don't quite believe them. We would see 8-10x larger traffic in Bitly, for example, than we would in our analytics package. So I think we have some ways to go from a technology perspective in being able to better account for the mobile web component of engagement in social media. But that's around the edges and something that all of us who work in this field are continuing to try to make more sense of.
And I'm sure some people here might have some ideas for. Let's take some questions.
One last one, and I'll run around with the microphone, but Jenna, while I'm running around, what didn't work?
Well, I just said that I think our
I mean, really, like one example of something that...
our mobile joining rates were lower than I had hoped for them. I wouldn't say it didn't work. I just think from the standpoint of what we were reasonably anticipating, we were below our targets there. Some people are leaving to go see Lost.
There's beer and wine afterwards.
that's right, we should have mentioned that.
Can you hear me?
Identify yourself.
It's working.
Yes, hi, my name's Marjorie Case, and I'm a social media consultant from Los Angeles, and we worked on a similar project, only revitalizing the Sunset Strip. And we used the tools to sort of bring the business back from the east side, which is Los Feliz and Silver Lake, and back to the Strip, because, But my question is this. You talked about measurement and metrics and really impressive results, but did you follow or did you qualify those followers? Did you get a sense of who was spamming you, who wasn't? And then on the same token with Facebook, did you go in the back end and see how many people removed you in their news, their news stream?
Yes. We, in the spirit of both how I've always operated and, frankly, the Bloomberg organization focus on data, we were very, very focused on analytics. And so, yes, we were looking very carefully at who our influencers were in the way that you described, and paying attention to when we would see spikes. Interestingly, we didn't see a lot of people leaving us. But what we saw was things that drove more engagement, certain types of content, certain times of day, began to give us a sense, a feel for the constituency and what was likely to succeed, that was informed entirely by the analytics that we were able to derive. So yeah, we were, I would say, in fact, obsessive about how we would look at and report analytics, both internally and externally.
How many would you say removed you from the newsfeed? I'm just curious.
Tiny percentages.
That's great.
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Amy Berryhill. I write for New York Convergence. I am a little bit confused about the methodology that you use to establish how many people you actually brought in on election day, rather. Can you kind of review that a little bit for me?
You start with trying to understand the overall social sphere, the number of people who are engaging in social media who live in New York City. And one of the reasons why you're confused is because that number doesn't exist in any scientific, reliable way. We came to that number based on analysis of various sources of counting. One good way of looking at it is starting with the Facebook advertising back end. If I say I want to target ads to New York City Facebook users, how many people is that? Depends on how tightly you draw the geography, but it's roughly 4.4 million people. One count gives you 5, one count gives you 3.7. So
kids, right?
I'm sorry.
Kids.
Over 18, excuse me. All of our, so I say, all of our advertising, every target that we did was people who could vote. We don't care if you can't vote. Let me say it this way: we don't want to spend our money on talking to people who are
Facebook page or something?
not an official one. So none of our spend was targeted on people who were below 18 or didn't have a geographic reason to be a voter in New York City. And then we looked at the number of Facebook accounts that say New York City, and that number again varies, but it's another 3.5, 3.3 million. So that puts you at around 8 as a total social sphere. I don't think that's accurate. I think that number is double counting. I think there are a lot of inactive profiles. There was a really interesting statistic someone had just this week, or maybe in the last week. In December, 17% of Facebook accounts Twitter accounts were active.
What was the?
17. Actually, the way it was framed was 83% were inactive, but 17% of 75 million accounts is still a lot of people. It's 12.7 million people. And I should say in this analysis that we're really looking at just Facebook and Twitter because that was where we spent most of our energy. There is much more to that. If you add LinkedIn and MySpace, I don't know who uses MySpace anymore, but if you add those in, I've seen numbers as high as 14 million accounts in New York City. You could make an argument that that's plausible, but it seems very high. So as we look deeper into that and analyze the amount of traffic and chatter and sources that we can get at from our partners about how many active users on Facebook and Twitter in New York City there are in a given time period right before the election, we came up with 3 million. I think that number is low, but I think it's conservatively reasonable. We do know from analyzing the number of people who participated in our donate status and tweet out the vote that we were at about 10%. In other words, 10% of people in New York City saw somebody that they knew say in these forums, "I'm voting for Mike Bloomberg, you should too." So that's how we get to 300,000. What I showed you from there was starting with just the citywide averages, the actual voter turnout as a percentage of registered voters, and the margin or the percentage of the vote for the mayor gives me a number that's around 37,000 people. What I projected was saying, I think that's too conservative. I think that people who are in social media are more likely to vote. And I think that people who are connected to people that are connected to our campaign are more likely to vote for our candidate. So I picked two numbers, 40% turnout and 70% for Bloomberg, which gets me to about 90,000.
Well, here we have a question over here.
Hi, my name is Julia Prieto from the Robin Hood Foundation. I do digital media. My question is, it seems like it would be interesting if Bloomberg were actually tweeting or dictating tweets or something to see how the numbers might have differed. Yeah, of course. But my question is, was there a decision early on to kind of ignore or not engage with negative feedback on social media, or did you, or how did you handle that, if that needed to go through some levels of approval with him, if you were sort of tweeting as him, but not really?
You're asking a couple different
Yes.
To your question about negatives, this is New York City. There are lots of opinions about lots of things. That's one of the things that makes New York City so rich and strong. Facebook was an open forum. Anybody could comment on the content on the campaign or on Mike's Facebook page, profile. We did, as administrators, occasionally delete content that used inappropriate language. That happened from time to time. And aggressively attacked other members of the community for their support for the mayor. If those two conditions were present, then yes, we might delete a comment. But the number of deleted comments was very, very low. I think it takes a certain masochism to follow and engage with somebody that you vehemently disagree with. There's just not that many people that do that.
Bill O'Reilly, come on, you people watch him.
Well, maybe there's a segment, but we didn't find him in our campaign. So, I mean, I think it's fair to say that we were aware of the potential for a problem there, but we never encountered any real concern in that regard. With respect to how we were communicating through these channels, we made a decision very early, knowing how online audience and, frankly, the political press, some of whom were here, would react to it not being Mike, pretending to be Mike in these forums, that the integrity of the campaign and the mayor's image online demanded that we didn't pretend to tweet as him when it wasn't him. I follow a lot of people on Twitter who tweet in the first person who I'm very certain are not tweeting in the first person. But we never implied that that was what was happening. It was always we as the campaign. The burst of interest in the mayor actually personally tweeting, I think, was driven a lot by that. It was like, oh, what's he going to say? His first tweet, by the way, was in Spanish. He said, "Como se dice?" first tweet. That was him. That was not Coach. That was just it. Yeah, I mean, I think that the standard that we set created a lot more interest when we actually did it. And I think it was absolutely appropriate for us and correct to not imply that he was doing it when he actually wasn't.
Hi, Jonah. Son, Micha Sifri, Tech President and Personal Democracy Forum. I have two questions. The first one, given that you weren't raising money, which is an unusual, great place to be, obviously, there's a lot of evidence from campaigns that when someone makes a donation, a small donation, that their level of activism goes up because you feel invested, right? $25. Those donors, small donors, actually then will do more and sometimes give more because they already feel like they've made an investment in the cause. And given that you weren't asking people to do that, did you try anything to offer other kinds of meaningful engagement to induce that sense of connection? Like what sorts of things did you experiment with? I mean, to be honest, I can't think of any, and I'm wondering if that means nothing really grabbed hold. But I assume you guys wrestled with this problem and looked for answers.
Your premise is correct, as I mentioned earlier. I do think it was a greater challenge for this campaign and the 2005 campaign and the 2001 campaign for not asking for that investment. We were aware, as everybody was, of the broad support that the mayor enjoyed and continues to enjoy at the beginning of the campaign. And we framed the engagement ask as continue to make New York City better, continue to keep our city moving forward. And so the nuances of that message certainly were tested using the tools that we have for analytics. But the theme was always the same. It was join us, be a part of continuing to keep the city moving forward. Would we have had more people engaged if we had been asking for money? Look at the Thompson campaign. I mean, they had 6,300 people on social media, so I don't know. Maybe that's not true for New York.
Right.
It's a hypothetical that I just don't know how to answer. But in the abstract, and from my now almost 16 years of experience in this field, yes, it's easier to get people to engage in a campaign if they've made an investment in that campaign.
Okay, and my other question, and I feel like I have to ask this, sort of the 800-pound gorilla sitting in the room. So the race turned out a lot closer than most people expected. And so my question is, to what degree did your use of social media as a listening tool help you see what was coming? Presumably you guys knew that it was going to be closer than expected. And what did you do, if anything, to try and deal with that in terms of how you use social media in the last few days of the campaign?
There was nothing that tactically that indicated in and of itself the final margin of the outcome and what we were seeing or hearing on social media. Our level of engagement, people talking about the mayor in a positive way, all of that was much bigger than our opponents. I think it belongs in a larger context, which is to say that I mean, I can just speak for myself. I never felt like we were going to win by 18 points. I operated every day in this campaign like we were behind, because that's the way to motivate yourself when you're in a campaign. So for me, the margin didn't matter. It was we got to win. The whole point of elections is to get one more vote than the other guy, and we're going to do everything we can to do that. And everything else is, for the press to dissect about how close or what close it wasn't. So I would turn that around and say, where did our opponents see something that drove that? I certainly don't see any evidence that they tactically responded to that. I think that the public polling and the coverage of the race drove a lot of things, and there was certainly a perception of inevitability, and that in a sense was correct, because the mayor won the election.
Another question over here.
You had a great advantage. Sorry, Jeffrey Mack, a social media consultant for some local campaigns in New Jersey. You had a tremendous advantage in that you were working with a known commodity. Right, a great brand. So how do you envision your job would have been different were you on the other side, where you were trying to propel somebody who, really not that many people knew about? It's the difference of, say, Apple versus John's little computer company trying to build the following. It's a very different situation, I think.
It's the same challenge that any communications expert or political consultant faces in the campaign. If you have the advantage of incumbency or name recognition, you have a built-in advantage. So the best way to answer that question is in the sense that our social media and our online strategy was integrated across the entire campaign. We all have that advantage of incumbency. I would just say, too, as just a point of fact to Mika's previous question, that Mayor Bloomberg still stands as one of the only incumbents that has survived this whole period, and the only independent. We ran a campaign in a city with a 6-to-1, 8-to-1 Democratic Party registration advantage, where a corpse is going to get 20% of the vote, without the advantage of any of the party apparatus and structure. So our advantage went beyond the fact that the mayor is a global figure, a person who at the time of the campaign began and continues to enjoy great support from New Yorkers. Those are all built-in advantages that, frankly, we didn't have to concern ourselves with. I've been involved in campaigns where I'm working on one right now where the name recognition is very small. You just go out and you slog and you try to find traction. One of the things that social media and digital media generally does add is the ability to quantify it. Kate's comment about, and Mika's about fundraising is one measure. Growth in constituency is another, traffic is another. You can potentially use these platforms to gain a better insight that a poll is not going to tell you about your relative velocity and things that are working. So if I were in that situation, I'd be looking for opportunities to break out and ways to quantify it that I could then reuse.
We're going to take two more questions. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Catherine Ventura. I'm a social media strategist, and I worked with a local candidate here in Manhattan. I'm curious if you had a content strategy, particularly about particularly with regard to Twitter? Did you determine in advance what you would be saying? Was it different from your regular press releases, and did you adjust it as you went along?
We did not ever push press releases into social medias. I think the press release sort of becomes a lazy shorthand for web content, and it's pretty bad web content. Again, from the standpoint of the overall integration of campaign, as all of you who followed the campaign are well aware, the mayor was endorsed by 450, 470 New Yorkers and organizations throughout the course of the campaign that began in February, continued right up until the end. That provided a great source of content. And so largely just kind of the day-to-day type content was driven by the latest endorsement and the latest news. Now I will just offer this interesting little observation. Sometime in maybe late August, early September, we began seeing people commenting like yet another endorsement. I endorse Mike Bloomberg too, right? Like, you know, Calvin Butts, I endorse Mike Bloomberg too. People just saying that themselves, and that was the germ of the idea for Who Got Your Vote. It was, yeah, let's let everybody who wants to say that they also support Mayor Bloomberg to have an opportunity to do so, and to acknowledge that and to spread that around. So, content strategy was driven largely by the larger context, but there were certainly tactical things that we engaged that were based on things that we observed.
Over here we have.
Hey, Jonah.
Hi, Michael. Sorry.
I'm good, thanks. First, I want to thank you for sharing all of this information. I had the pleasure of having dinner with Jonah 2 or 3 times over the course of the campaign, and he always said, "I'll tell you afterwards." You know, I'm trying to keep this confidential, and you kept your promise, and I appreciate that for sharing all this really valuable information. Most campaigns don't. One piece of information I don't know if you know the answer to, but if you do, I'd love to hear it, is what percentage would you say of your Facebook fans came to the Facebook page and joined organically versus from seeing an ad on Facebook, clicking on it, and then joining? Because I'm trying to make the case for certain clients of ours that if you want people to join your Facebook group, you have to advertise. Is there truth to that?
You'll have to buy me dinner. I don't have, and I'm not bullshitting you, I don't have discrete quantifiable ways of answering that question. I can look at our click performance on Facebook, and I can tell you generally, but to the earlier question, people did leave. I mean, there were, you know, when you've got 27,000 fans, you're going to have some churn. That said, I would absolutely adamantly agree with your recommendations. I don't think, especially in a case where you have no real recognition or idea, that it is possible to recruit in social media without promotion. You have to kickstart that. You have to give it some energy. How much is a question of overall allocations. Obviously, for those of you who don't know, Michael Bassick is one of the leading experts in digital advertising and politics. You know how hard it is for us to define budgets in this world. But I think that as a starting point, any legitimate social media strategy necessarily includes online advertising as a component of promotion. If you're succeeding, that can become less significant. But back to that 3 million social sphere and share of voice, there's a lot of people. Sheryl Sandberg, the COO of Facebook, just told TechCrunch the other day, 175 million people log into Facebook every day. There's an incredible amount of content in this universe. So you've got to be able to put it in front of people. It's Facebook, for those of you who don't know, has a very interesting and very effective form of advertising, which is a social ad. So if Michael is a supporter of Mayor Bloomberg's Facebook page, and Kate is his friend, and we've bought an ad targeted to an area where Kate is, she'll see, join Mike Bloomberg, Michael Bassick is a fan. That's one of the things I think justifies additional investment. the simple answer to your question is yes, we need to invest in promotion as part of the social media.
Jonah, we need to wrap, but I just thought of one last question I'm dying to ask, which is, did you have a conscious or an organized retweet or please retweet strategy? So when Calvin Butts was going to endorse, did you speak to somebody in his office and ask them if they, how many, would they retweet or, go out to their network on the day that he's endorsing? Was there any attempt to...
To my knowledge, as a general rule, we did not do that as part of our discussions with endorsement tactics. We did certainly ask people to retweet certain content, and they often obliged. No, it wasn't like, hey, we'd like your endorsement and we'd like you to tweet on our behalf. No.
Okay, Kate, do you have anything else you want to add? Question, last one?
No, but I'd like to just mention that we're...
Yep, so a couple of things. Thank you, Jonah. Thank you very much. For those of you who are interested, Personal Democracy Forum is going to be held here in New York, June 3rd and 4th and 5th, with an unconference on the 5th. Jonah, you're welcome back if you would like to discuss these issues again and invite the mayor back. Maybe we can ask him while he's not tweeting as much as he... Tweet at him. I'll tweet at him. We have some wine and beer in the back. Please stay. You're welcome to stay and chat with Jonah and us. Thank you very much. Thank you for Social Media Week for helping us put this together. And lastly, thank you to the Open Planning Project for letting us use this space and ClickZ for sponsoring. Thank you very much.